Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. If you travel along Vermont's roadsides, you're starting to see color spring up everywhere. Yes, it's almost autumn, but those colors at this time of year are not leaves. They're political signs. Today's guest is a man who hopes to become the next governor of the state of Vermont, Scott Milne.
Thank you, Scott Wheeler.
Hey, welcome to the show. It was nice that you've taken the time to come and discover the Northeast Kingdom.
Yes, well, I've discovered it before, but it's always great to get back up here, and it will be a real privilege and probably in many ways a humbling experience to have the opportunity to come back as governor in 2015. I'm looking forward to it.
I know before the show I was telling you how I served with your with the Republican predecessor, Governor Douglas, and I used to joke to the governor that he was up here so much that he could have probably had a mail-in address, because I think he truly appreciated this area, and he really liked the people. And I would love to say that I think the other governor, he's from the South, so he's probably spreading out down there. And we do recognize Governor Shumlin because we see him on TV. We don't see him very often in the Northeast Kingdom, but do you plan on visiting us once you're elected?
Sure. It's funny, Scott. People ask me, boy, isn't it tough running for governor? And I would say two things. One, it's tougher running a small business in Vermont. I have about 75 employees, and a long story, but I've got 4 very good key people that have been long-term, very trusted, very competent, very capable leaders in my organization that are more or less running that for me. I'm spending a few minutes to maybe an hour or two a day on that. So it's nice to have that set aside. I think that looking forward to being governor, just this experience of the campaign and seeing how much fun it is to get out and talk to people, yourself, folks that we've been around here all day in the Northeast Kingdom talking to. It's really a lot of fun. I think you hit the nail on the head with Governor Douglas, who sometimes got chided or joked about for finding, could never go buy a ribbon without cutting it. I think anytime you opened any kind of business in the Northeast Kingdom, Governor Douglas would drive up here and make a point of congratulating you on your business and let you know that the state of Vermont was there to support you and help you. We've got a governor now that can't find enough businesses opening to get in the paper by cutting ribbons, so he's got to sign a new law every day. I think we saw the legislative session end, and then we had 100 days in a row of him going someplace to sign a new law. I guess he didn't come up here to sign too many of them. But
the thing is you're a small businessman, I am. And when I served in the State House for those few years, I was like totally amazed how oblivious so many legislators are to small business. We're all lumped in there with Walmart and everything. But it shouldn't surprise me that it's a surprise, because if you went up to 20 people in the legislature, the House or the Senate, I swear if you went up to 20 people, said, what do you do for a living? Probably 16 of them are going to say lawyer. Now, I happen to have tremendous respect for lawyers, and because some of our best ideas, they might sound like great ideas, but they're also unconstitutional, and so the lawyers are able to keep us on track. But basically what I'm saying is there's not many. You got a lot of retirees, you have social workers and that, but you don't have many business people anymore. You don't have many farmers.
Well, on lawyers, I would, on a national level, one thing I believe is, we have more lawyers per capita than any place on earth, but I think it's arguable we have more freedom than any place on earth. And one of the concerns I have about the direction of Montpelier is there's not enough balance in the legislature, whether it's business people or lawyers or farmers. There's not enough balance, and we're seeing freedom erode. We're seeing a government that thinks it's more and more powerful and more likely to be able to make better decisions than decisions made at the local level. I have 3 principles upon which I'm running this campaign. One is that the more locally a decision can be made, the better. Too many things are being pushed down the throats of Vermonters through Montpelier, and even worse, in my opinion, by a governor who's traveling around the country 25% of the time, we learned recently, out of state, finding special interest kind of wedge issues to drive through the legislature that's all progressive Democratic. Second principle upon which my campaign is founded is that, we really need to be a practical state. That's the Vermont tradition, the Vermont history. We look at problems and find practical solutions. I think too often now what we're finding are political ideologies that we want to kind of prevent some problem from occurring, so we invent a problem to apply our political ideology on everybody. And then I think third and most importantly, and it speaks very much to your point, Scott, that there's maybe the legislature got caught asleep at the switch on approving some of these projects, and maybe it's related to not having enough business experience, but I think it's more just there's not enough balance there, and having a Republican in the governor's office will inherently bring balance back. But we don't seem to have a governor and an administration that's able to competently manage the people's money. I think the disaster with Vermont Health Connect is just sort of the headline of that, but if you look at the way many other programs, whether it's through the Agency of Commerce or the Agency of Health and Human Services, whether it's through the Agency of Natural Resources, Department of Transportation, it seems to me the consistent thread through the last 4 years of the Milne administration is we don't really know what we're doing, but trust us, give us another 2 years and we'll figure it out. I think people have heard that twice, and I think it's time to trust Scott Milne, and let's try to find a new governor.
I was a member of the House Health Care Committee. Actually, I was on leadership for my first 2 years, and I watched this whole thing starting to take shape, and I happened, if somebody could come up with a feasible plan for single payer, I'm not saying I'm against it, but when you're not being told where the money's coming from, okay, we can't tell you now, we can wait until after the election or something. No, just tell me now. But the truth is, you don't really know.
Right.
Or if they do know, it's going to be so bad that they don't want us to know right now.
Right. I agree with you, Scott. I think that that we started off with a plan essentially, which is it's going to be a great solution for problems. We don't really know how it's going to work. We don't know how much it's going to cost, and by gosh, we don't know how we're going to pay for it. But other than that, it sounds like a great idea. Trust me, I'll tell you about how it's going to work, how much it's going to cost, and how we're going to pay for it after the election. We heard that in 2010. We heard that in 2012. I don't think people are going to buy it in 2014. I think people are very skeptical of the accomplishments and the agenda of the incumbent administration. I believe there's a tremendous opportunity that we're going to see a change with an incumbent governor losing his re-election quest for the first time in 52 years in Vermont. And for me to be able to do that, it's important that folks that believe that that's what's in the best interest of Vermont, a more balanced approach, administration that's focused on jobs, on preventing property taxes from rising. It's important to me that folks that believe that get their friends out to vote, because it's going to be a shame if I lose by a couple of votes and find out that 75% of the people that sat out didn't vote were on my side.
Right. So who is Scott Milne other than the candidate?
Oh, thanks. Well, we've talked a little bit about my business background. I would argue, although I think by Vermont standards I have a pretty extensive track record of success in small business. I'm in the travel business primarily. Travel is kind of one of the industries that I think on both a state level, national level, and really on a global level, one of the first businesses really most affected by globalization of information, essentially the internet. Our businesses thrived. 15 years ago, people thought travel agencies like mine were essentially dinosaurs headed into an ice age. We've came up with a game plan, which is essentially folks were going to value knowledgeable people, folks were going to value Main Street locations, folks were still going to buy based on relationships as long as the prices were comparable with what they could get somewhere else. So we've done very well with that. I think a lot of the changes that need to happen to state government are very similar to the challenges, whether it's the media business, which has gone through a lot of changes and it's in the middle of a lot of changes now, the news business, publishing businesses. State government really needs to be looked at in a different way, and we kind of just need to take a look at how we're doing things, making sure people are getting the services they deserve at the best possible price. I think I'll be very good at that. Beyond my business background, I'm a multi-generational Vermonter. My Ancestors came over from Scotland to work in the granite quarries in Barrie about 100 years ago. My mom's a New Yorker, met my dad, and about, I think, 90 days after I was born, the family moved to Vermont. My younger brother and sister were born in Barrie, except for about 10 years when I was first job, and I went to college in California. Been in Vermont my whole life. And Scott, if you'd beg my indulgence, I'll just tell you a little bit about what I think is going very wrong with Vermont right now, and tied to my personal story, which is I moved here 27 years ago. My parents had a small travel business and gave me the opportunity with my young son, who's sitting here off camera, to move home and buy a branch from them in West Lebanon, New Hampshire. They were wanted to downsize their business and have one branch, and we bought that business from them. Now, I grew up in Vermont. I love Vermont, have a relationship with Vermont. Kind of textbook would have been, you own a business in New Hampshire, set it up as a New Hampshire corporation, live in New Hampshire, pay less taxes, make more money over the next 27 years, Scott. But I really love Vermont and wanted to have my kids grow up in Vermont as I did. So I made the decision to live in Vermont, to drive to New Hampshire to work most days. Now I own a much larger business with 8 branches in 6 different states. I got employees in about 10 states, and actually employees in 2 countries now. But I made the decision to be a Vermonter, to pay Vermont taxes, even though I didn't have to, because I have a personal relationship with Vermont. And I think 27 years ago, even people that didn't have a personal relationship were still, by and large, moving to Vermont, even if they were just looking for kind of a good transaction, a good place to treat them fairly and to raise a family and take advantage of all the natural beauty and things we have. What's happened over the last 27 years is clearly the folks that don't have a relationship with Vermont, by and large, are not coming here. That's why the only demographic that's growing in Vermont are people over 65.
Right.
Kids are not coming back here. Young families are not moving here. Schools are shrinking. We all know about those things. There's not jobs being created here for young people. What I see especially accelerating in the last 4 years is people like myself, I would presume like yourself, that love Vermont, have a relationship with Vermont. Even those people now are finding it not a fair place to stay. And even though, you know, it doesn't even have to be equal, but just as long as it's close to fair, you'd stay here. We're chasing those people away from Vermont, and with that, it's going to be a huge problem. I'm running for governor because I think we need to change that. I think we need a new governor to do it. I'm excited about the opportunity to be that person.
I was shocked. There's a woman that I've been friends with all of my life, and she has multiple restaurants in Vermont, and I just learned that she's maintaining all of her restaurants in Vermont as she has now moved. She and her husband have moved to Florida and bought a restaurant in Florida. Why? Because she said that with every passing year, it's becoming harder and harder to do business in Vermont. So they've had to start branching outwards while they start doing alternative things with their Vermont businesses. And I'm hearing this time and time again. Like, to tell you the truth is, and I'll be quite honest, my wife is the book whiz. So she does all the books for me, and she has assured me that, yes, the taxes are getting worse all the time. You know, the one thing that came up is you also, and I look at this, one reason I kind of like you too, you weren't perfect. You, back in college, you had some legal issues. And, you know, when I heard that, it was obviously, I don't know if you brought it out or if somebody else did, automatically I appreciated that. I've never had a speeding ticket. But on the other hand is, I want a real person. I want a real person in there. Do you want to address any of that? Because it's going to come out.
Sure. Thanks, Scott. I haven't had a speeding ticket recently, so we got something in common. What I would say is, you know, made some mistakes as a young man, and I decided early on that one of the big problems I have with the incumbent is a lack of transparency. That, you know, we've got this funding plan for the healthcare system, but he doesn't want to tell us. That's a lack of transparency. What I tell reporters are, I'll answer any question you ask me now. If I'm fortunate enough to become governor, I'll answer any question, and it's going to be a direct order from me to the people that work for me. We're not hiding stuff from the people of Vermont, and the press is really the fifth estate in that, as you know. I decided on my own to come out with some of my youthful indiscretions, as some people have I called them for two reasons. One, I wanted to demonstrate that not only was I going to talk about transparency, which coincidentally everybody does when they run for office, but that I wanted to put some skin in the game and prove that I would take a painful, embarrassing lesson in my life and put it out there for people to see, just to hopefully demonstrate firsthand that if I am fortunate enough to become your governor, I am going to be transparent and I'm walking the walk, not just talking the talk. Secondly, Scott, and I think most importantly, you can't get elected governor without having a lot of people believe in you, a lot of people supporting you, a lot of people working hard for you. And I didn't want those people to find out in October that I had done something that, had they known, they would not have worked for me, or they would have felt like, why did I put all this effort in for a guy that didn't tell us the truth?
Right. So now that we've talked, do you want to discuss any of that, just so people don't think you're a triple murderer or something?
Well, I think when the polls get close, if you see TV ads that I'm a triple murderer or something like that, it just means that the opposition is worried and they're coming up with something. But, you know, I had some an 18-month period in college where I got arrested a few times for driving under the influence, and one time for possession of, drugs. And embarrassing part of my life. My son's here sitting off stage. Hopefully it's an inspiration to my children and maybe other children. I think there's a fine line between being transparent and somehow glorifying what was idiotic, stupid behavior, which I do not condone.
And that's how come I really appreciate, and that's how come I wanted to mention it, because although I'm not saying you should hold it as a badge of honor,
right? Absolutely not.
I really appreciate people who can make their transition. Like, for example, like T.J. Donovan, I didn't know this about him when he was running, and somebody leaked information that he'd been charged with a crime and been convicted or pled to a crime when he was 18 years old, maybe simple assault. He is now the district, I believe it's the district
state's attorney,
state's attorney for Chittenden County, and I think, wow, he obviously made a effort to change, and so I think you're commendable. You're like a real person, because maybe I haven't had a speeding ticket, but I will tell you, I have poached my share of fish out of the Clyde River when I was growing up, and the only thing is I didn't get caught, because I was a state champion runner.
Oh, well.
And the game wardens a little bit slower. So no, I appreciate your skeletons, and I appreciate you sharing them, because I think because you can't hide anything. It's like, for example, Tom Salmon, who's a good friend of mine, when he was picked up for DWI, he owned up to it.
He was a good guy about it.
Yep, and so, okay, we only have about 10 more minutes left. Yeah, it's short time. But can Scott Milne really win this race?
Absolutely. Poll came out after the primary. I had some pretty good opposition in the primary, but the challenges I have are no experience in statewide elected office, relatively low name recognition, particularly compared to our incumbent governor, who everybody knows. I have very little money compared to the incumbent governor. But I would argue that most of the weaknesses I have, i.e. lack of experience and lack of money, really are assets that I have. I think people are sick of $3 million governor's races. I think they want to see a campaign of ideas, and we have some very good principles upon which we've been talking. Today is the first day of the campaign. Really, the governor's announcing his campaign kickoff in a couple hours. So we'll have a lot of fun over the next couple of weeks, making sure the governor's got to be held accountable for the overreaches and mistakes he's made in the last 4 years, and weaving in more definition on some of the solutions that we'll be talking about for Vermonters. My fear, we're talking about folks that leave the state because they feel like it's not a fair deal. Intuitively, I'd say I'll get 75%. If there was a vote of Vermonters in Florida, I'd win 75% of that vote. The way I could lose this election is if I end up with 75% of the people that didn't vote. The folks that agree that we need more balance in Montpelier, we need a change of direction, we need to put a cap on rising property taxes, need to help me get people out to vote that feel that way. And if that happens, there's a very good chance of winning. As you and I were talking about, Scott, the poll came out after the primary that showed the governor below 50%. me down 12 points very early on in this campaign. Folks that are in that business say, if it's, understanding the two candidates, me as an unknown, him as a very well-known incumbent governor, that he was below 50, that I was 12 points down, it's probably single digits this week. So it's going to bounce up and down a little bit between low double digits and single digits, but as long as we're in striking distance in October, we're going to have a good run at it, and I think we've got a great chance to change Vermont in a way that's going to be great for our kids, grandkids, and parents.
Well, you say that, you don't have any experience in state government, but you have very good genetics in state government, because just explain to the viewers your connection to the state house.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thanks for asking. My grandfather was, people think of Vermont as an all-Republican state for a long time. It was all-Democrat representation in the state legislature from the advent of the Republican Party in the 1850s through 1938. My grandfather was the first Republican elected from Barrie since Reconstruction when he came in 1938. He went on to run, I know Lola Aiken died yesterday.
Sure.
My grandfather actually worked with Lola Aiken and he ran George Aiken's office in Washington for a few years. Came back to Vermont, worked as an unemployment commissioner, went on to be a federal judge for the rest of his career. My dad, who you worked with, has been clerk of the House. He was a deputy assistant clerk in the House of Representatives when Phil Hoff was a freshman legislator. Speaking of once every 52-year occurrences, Phil Hoff was the last person to beat an incumbent governor in Vermont. So I hope I've got a little Phil Hoff mojo going for me in that regard. My mom, Marion Milne, I think is an inspirational story, and one, if we have time, I'll share in a minute or two. My mom died a few weeks ago and ran a couple times when I was a little kid for the legislature. Then when she was 60, I think 60 in 1994 she ran. I think it was the second or third time she ran. She lost the two previous times. Talking about, people defying odds and things, her seatmate in that two-member district was Kermit Richardson, who you might recall was majority leader in the House for a while, very well-respected political leader and friend of our families. And when my mom announced, he was quoted in the press as saying, "I got a lot of respect for Marion Milne, I love her, but she can't win this race." She lost a JP race in her town of Washington a few months ago. My mom went on to win that race, went on to really love the legislature. Among all the things she did in her life, she really loved one-on-one contact with helping people as a legislator. In the last year, a former governor came out and said, mostly based on my mom's legislative experience, but also based on her whole life, if somebody writes a book about the 100 greatest Vermonters, there should be a chapter about Marion Milne. That 1994 race that she ran, Scott, where Kermit Richardson handicapped her as not winning it, she based that on a philosophy of I'm just naive enough to believe that I can make a difference. So I think from going from being handicapped to not even being able to win the race to 15 years later having a governor describe you as one of the 100 greatest Vermonters, you need to be naive enough to believe that you can make a difference. I'm naively optimistic that I'm going to win this race. In order to do that, what I need are folks like you, folks up here in the Northeast Kingdom that agree with me, to be naively optimistic enough to believe that your vote matters. That's how we win races, one vote at a time. So if you believe that we need change, more balance in Montpelier, we need to get the economy turned around, and we need to put a cap on rising property taxes, I'd love to have your support, and I'll look forward to being your governor.
Well, we recently, up here in the Northeast Kingdom, you really never know what, because people love to say that we're a Republican area. Well, that's largely true, but in my district in Derby, we've had mostly Republicans, but then Winston Dallin, who's a very fine man, who I kicked out of office, but I still think he was a good man. He was a progressive, and then we've had a Democrat. It's basically they want just somebody they can trust, and that they can that is approachable, and I think that's why Governor Douglas did so well. But then you mentioned Lola Aiken. Lola Aiken was the one who convinced me to run for office.
Oh, well.
I was doing an article about her husband, and Lola, on my radio show, I'm replaying an interview that I had with her, and I said, Lola, she can convince you, she was such a nice woman. She just died at 102. I said, you could convince me and most people of the merits of walking out in front of a bus. And because she just, you know, she was such a wonderful woman, and she had this way that she could have convinced me. Well, she convinced me of the merits of running for the State House. And after I won, my first day there, I called up Lola from the steps of the State House, beautiful building, and I said, Lola, what did you do to me? Because you get down here and you think, wow, do I really know what I'm doing? But yeah, do you have any memories of Lola?
No, I never really got to know her well. I have tremendous memories, though, of as a young boy of my grandfather talking about working for George Aiken in Washington. I spent a semester in Washington, D.C. My grandfather came down and we went out to lunch to a restaurant that was still there in the 70s that he and George Aiken used to eat at. When I first moved to Vermont, I lived in Sharon, Vermont, and there was a place that's burned down since then, Brooksy's. And that was sort of halfway between Barrie and Putney, more or less. And with my young family, we would often go there for breakfast, and my grandfather would talk about when they were home from Washington, when he and Aiken met, they'd often meet at Brooksy's for conversations about what was going on. So more my Aiken and Lola memories come directly from my grandfather, who worked closely with them. Last time I saw George and Lola, I've seen Lola around several times, but last time I saw them together, I got out of high school at Spalding High School in Barrie, went to University of Vermont for 1 year before I transferred to a school in Southern California. But George Aiken came to speak at an economics class and had Lola with him, and I had a nice conversation with him and had some, fond recollections of what he had to say about my grandfather and passed along hellos. So he was a great Vermonter.
You know, the one thing I've always wondered about with the Northeast Kingdom is, I write the history of the Northeast Kingdom, but it was George Aiken who not necessarily coined the phrase the Northeast Kingdom. He popularized it, as in he made the world know about the Northeast Kingdom. And we have nothing, I can't think of anything that we have named after George Aiken. Like, I thought the federal land out in Essex County, it should be the George Aiken whatever. But before I go, something here is going to be named after George Aiken. And then, of course, there was his great sidekick, Lola, because, yes, she was the senator's wife, but she was far more than just a wife. She was a political powerhouse in her own.
Yeah, she ran his office, eh?
So with only just a few more minutes left, what more would you like to tell the viewers? I kicked off my campaign at the Aldrich Library in Barrie in the third week in July. I promised Vermonters, and I continue to say today, and I absolutely promise you, if I'm fortunate enough to get elected, I will always listen before I act. It's another concern I have about what we have now, where we seem to be acting and selling things to Vermonters before we really understand whether or not Vermonters need them. I find that to be a troublesome development. I also promise I'll be a full-time governor. I think, we've seen recently where our governor spends 25% of the time out of state and claims that all this fundraising he's doing and all this shenanigans for the Democratic Governors Association somehow pays big dividends for Vermont. I'm very much business in my criticism of the Shelburne administration. I have a lot of respect for his family and what he's accomplished in his life. I don't want to cross that line at all, but I will say that I think we are experiencing the weakest governor that we've seen in 52 years in Vermont. Part of the reason for that is just lack of accomplishment. If he's the weakest governor we've seen in 52 years and all this travel he's doing on behalf of the Democratic Governors Association is really good for Vermont. You just think, though, remember when Governor Douglas used to have to go overseas to drum up business? He was a bad man. Remember that? And and now this governor seems to travel.
When Governor Douglas traveled, it was transparent. He was flying in coach. Taxpayers were paying for it. Now we have a governor who's traveling wherever he's traveling. It's not transparent, and we have private businesses paying for his travel. If I'm traveling out of state, it's going to be on behalf of the people of Vermont. People of Vermont are going to be paying for it. They're going to be paying my salary. They'll know whether I'm working and what I'm doing, and all the expense reports will be there for public viewing, as they were with Governor Douglas. He did get criticized for it, I think unjustifiably so.
Right. Now, one thing I will say, from living in rural Vermont, some of my relatives have been here since probably the glaciers pulled out. And we've been here for generations.
That was like in March of 1995,
Well,
wasn't it?
that's probably true too. No, actually, after this last winter, they were probably sliding back down.
Right.
But no, the thing is, we've been here for generations, but there is a real disconnect between urban Vermont, also known as Chittenden County, and rural Vermont, whether it's not just the Northeast Kingdom, but like when I was in the State House, there was a misconception about the Northeast Kingdom and our needs. And I will say this, I think sometimes we get really, really tired of if we want a wind farm, hey, let's put it up in the Northeast Kingdom. If you want a really large landfill, let's put that in the Northeast Kingdom. It seems like, and Casellers, they run a very good operation. And then the wind power, let's cite them on Camel's Hump. Let's cite them on Mount Mansfield if they're such a great idea.
I think that we've seen this evolution of, really, Scott, more or less there's becoming more and more apparent to me that there's two Vermonts.
Oh, there is.
Vermont with a economic engine that seems to be working, although there's some real concerns with IBM, and even the tone from the top in the Shumlin administration potentially is jeopardizing the economic viability of even Chittenden County, but the rest of Vermont's been left out. If you go back to 2008 and look at job growth by county, Orleans, because of the EB-5 program and the great entrepreneurial activity and accomplishments of Bill Stanger,
Bill Stanger's a great guy.
He's had job growth. His program is being mismanaged by the Shumlin administration, and it could become a very big problem. It might become an issue in this campaign. It's not because of Bill Stanger, it's because of the Shumlin administration's mismanagement of the people's money through the Agency of Commerce. The other county that we've seen job growth in is Chittenden County. So Orleans and Chittenden are really the only two counties in Vermont that have seen job growth since 2008. That's terrible. That needs to change. We need a governor like Governor Douglas that's going to be coming around the state and talking to everybody. We need a governor that when he's leaving Vermont is 100% of the time working for the businesses and the people of Vermont to attract economic resources, whether those are business resources, intellectual talent, or other things to Vermont. I'll be doing that.
Now, do you have the Governor Douglas's memory for names? There was I have never ever met anybody. He could be in Bennington and have a short conversation with somebody, and I swear 3 weeks later he could be up on the border here, run into that person, say hi, and call him right by name. You've got to admit he has a memory.
Oh, he's he's become I joke with people. I go, I'm probably one of 25,000 or more people in Vermont that think I've got a great friendship with Jim Douglas. And he's just a tremendous man. Real quickly, Chris Graff does this series with Vermont Public Television called The Governors, where he interviews governors. And I wished when he interviewed Jim Douglas, because I think outside of all of his other accomplishments, just his memory and knack for names. I one time said to Jim Douglas, I would guess there's maybe 10,000 people in Vermont that you can walk up to and say, hi, Scott, by first name. And, he's a funny guy, right? He goes, well, Scott, it's about 200 people a town. No, I'm sorry, I got my town. There's 200 towns. He goes, well, Scott, that's about 50 people a town. Yeah, probably something like that. And I wish Chris Graff would have asked him that and got it permanently into the history books for 100 years from now, because it's a tremendous asset. My daughter was a young girl, met Jim Douglas once, was with her classmates at Tunbridge Fair with a whole bunch of kids. 4 years later, Jim Douglas looked at her, hadn't seen her in 4 years, and said, hello, Elise. And just something tremendous for her inspiration to realize the value of government and what it's like to be in a small, great democratic state like Vermont. So I love Jim Douglas.
Well, I know my daughter, who's now 23, been through grad school. Because I was a reporter in my previous life with the Chronicle, when she was growing up, she got to meet she got to meet Howard Dean, and then Jim Douglas, and she said, well, I've really got to meet Governor Shumlin, and so I've got to introduce them. But so would it be safe to say that you will be the next governor that she'll be shaking the hand of?
I'd love that to be the case. I'm working really hard. I need people that agree with me to help out, whether it's voting, getting other people out to vote, making phone calls, helping us organize activities. If you're interested in working with us, reach out, and we'd love to have you be part of a movement which I think is going to make history and bring balance back to Montpelier, help us get our economy turned around, and end this really double-digit increase in property taxes every year.
Okay, well, thank you for coming on the show, because
Pleasure, Scott.
I know the day that we're recording here, you are back to back with interviews and everything.
It's been a good day, and we got about 57 more good days, and then hopefully it'll be a great day for myself, the folks that are working hard for me, and I'll work hard to make it a great event for Vermont.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott.
And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.